Hola amigos y bienvenidos a una nueva clase de emprendimiento. El día de hoy hablaremos sobre la segunda parte del Lean Startup Method, una metodología que se puede aplicar a cualquier tipo de emprendimiento y hacerlo crecer de una forma innovadora y fácil. In today's class, we are going to talk about the Lean Startup Method, remembering the first video about the topic. Second, we are going to talk about some common problems of startups so we might know how to ameliorate the effects and overcome the obstacles. Third, we're going to talk about the second part of the book, which is steer, and analyze each one of its specific points. And finally, we're going to have a project. What is the Lean Startup method? A Lean Startup is a method used to fund a new company or introduce a new product on behalf of an existing company. The Lean Startup method advocates developing products that customers have already demonstrated they desire, so that a market will already exist as soon as the product is launched. It is important to know some important ideas of the Lean Startup, which are entrepreneurs are everywhere, entrepreneurship is management, validated learning is very important for you so you can learn what customers want before they even tell you, innovation accounting, and build, measure, learn, which is the most important loop of this whole methodology. Now, we are going to talk about some problems that startups might face at the beginning of their operations. The first one is poor business planning. Proper planning is the key for startups to get the business off the ground. In this technological landscape, writing a formal business plan based on a vague requirement of some institutions is suicidal. Due to poor planning, many businesses fail in very first year because they do not effectively factor in challenges and pitfalls. Of course, the Lean Startup method says that it is not necessary to have like a business plan before starting everything, but it is necessary to learn from somebody else's error in order to not repeat it. For that reason, the Lean Startup method says that it is necessary to have a business plan, but don't expect perfection. Build along the way. The second is the lack of a dedicated team. Due to the lack of a proper team, any business, any startup will suffer immensely. Lack of commitment aggravates frustration in the organization, which quickly escalates into an open conflict. If a team member starts making under commitments due to the fear of being responsible or blamed for failure, business and startups will never achieve their goals. The Lean Startup method says that motivation is one of the most important factors when it comes to the startup. So, the duty of the leader is to know what's happening with every single one of the members, and if anybody has a problem, find the best way to ameliorate it and overcome the problems altogether as a team. Finally, first, competition. Competition is one of the most inevitable challenges that any startup must face in its lifetime. In fact, startups have to bear the brunt of facing two-way challenge. On the first hand, one is coming from monopolistic business, which have dominated the whole market and they are making difficult for newcomers to merge. On the other hand, there are countless startups that are launched regularly in the market, having innovative ideas, so it is highly likely to get swallowed by the shadow of those startups. The Lean Startup method says that it is okay to have competition because it keeps you alert, and if you're alert, innovation is going to appear as a side consequence. So, the more competition you have, the better for you because it's going to force you to leave your comfort zone and start innovating and creating new products that are very likely to be a great success. Now, we are going to talk about the second part of the book, The Lean Startup, which is called Steer. Leap. The idea of leap is prioritize validating the riskiest assumption, leave unpaid assumptions of your startup plan first before starting to build your MVP, which stands for minimum viable product. A minimum viable product needs to establish a product that rapidly turns a full cycle of the build, measure, learn loop in the last amount of effort possible. ready to provide data and validated learning to inform the next cycle. Startups need to conduct experiments that help determine what techniques will work in their unique circumstances. For startups, the role of strategy is to help figure out the right questions to ask. Test. This part considers analogs and antilocks when looking to validate assumptions. On the first hand, analogs, patterns from other products or services that can be applied to validate an assumption. On the other hand, antilocks. They are anti-patterns from other products or services that can be applied to disprove an assumption. What differentiates the success histories from failures is that the successful entrepreneurs had the foresight, the ability, and the tools to discover which parts of their plan were working brilliantly and which were misguided, and adapt their strategies accordingly. Don't take data for granted through reports and metrics. Get out and validate it firsthand by directly interacting with the customers. A minimum viable product isn't about building small, it's about ensuring you have the fastest possible cycle through the build, measure, lean feedback loop with a minimal amount of effort. A minimum viable product doesn't need to be a working product, even in a crude form. It can be a website, a video, a marketing pitch, whatever it takes to test your fundamental business hypothesis quickly. Measure. Innovation accounting is required to identify and measure the key growth drivers of your particular product or service that exist on a particular market. There are three steps to innovation accounting. The first is use your minimum viable product to establish data on where your product is right now. The second is tune the product from its baselines towards the ideal. The third one is assess the progress. If aligned with an ideal, then continue forward. If this is not possible, then pivot. Every product development, marketing, or another initiative that a startup undertakes should be targeted at improving one of the drivers of its growth model. Poor quantitative results force us to declare failure and create a motivation, context, and space for more qualitative research. Pivot. It requires vision, intuition, and judgment to understand when sufficient progress against the original hypothesis is being met and pivot is required. The problem with the notion of shipping a product and then seeing what happens is that you are guaranteed to success. Sometimes a pivot includes: first, zoom in, refocusing the product on just one feature of a large whole. Second, zoom out, refocusing your product to be a feature of a broader product. Third, customer segment, keeping the functionality but changing the audiences on focus, MVP to mainstream customers or small to big customers. Fourth, platform pivot, offering your product on a self-serve platform over a direct-to-customer solution or vice versa. Fifth, business architecture, from high margin low volume to low margin high volume. Value capture, finding new ways to capture value, typically via monetization or revenue models created by your product. Technology, achieving the same solution using different methodology to provide super priced and performance. Think of a startup runaway as the total number of pivots the company can make, focusing on getting pivots faster by decreasing the time cost of validating learning. Establish a frequent schedule of pivot or persevere meetings to objectively assess the results with products and business teams, deciding on the path forward. In a nutshell, a pivot isn't just a change, it is better understood as a new strategic hypothesis that will require a new minimum viable product to test. This is the last part of our session, and now here comes the time to practice. If you remember the last session, I asked you to think about a business plan, and now we have to define our business ecosystem using all the things that we've learned now and define who you are. Define what kind of business would you like to work on or would you like to lead following the instructions of the first two classes of the Lean Startup. That was it for today's lesson, guys. Please don't forget to watch the previous video about the basic concepts of the Lean Startup method. Now, please don't forget to subscribe and share this video because that will help us a lot to grow the channel. That was it for today's video. Thank you. Bye.